You ever get that feeling that the universe is operating on principles we haven't quite grasped yet? That there's like a deeper code at play?
Oh, absolutely.
Today we're diving into the really intriguing ideas of Dan Winter. He's a thinker who, well, he pulls together concepts from fields that seem totally separate, to offer this unique perspective on how everything works.
Exactly. We've looked at quite a range of discussions and materials featuring Dan Winter. He explores these fascinating connections between physics, geometry, even like ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
His work often draws on insights from pioneers, people like Buckminster Fuller and Itzhak Bentov, folks who weren't afraid to think way outside the box.
Right. Now, some of the ideas we'll be exploring, well, they might sound a bit unconventional, maybe even strange. Winter connects scientific principles with concepts that, aren't typically part of mainstream science.
Hmm.
But it's often right there at those intersections that we find truly novel insights, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, our goal today isn't really to endorse every single specific claim, but more to uh, understand the core of Winter's vision. We want to unpack his central ideas like charge collapse and the role of these fractal patterns, and see how he uses them to explain things like gravity, consciousness, even the potential of certain technologies.
Okay, so think of this as a kind of guided exploration into a fascinating and, yeah, pretty complex worldview. We're aiming to highlight the key principles and, hopefully spark some aha moments for you listeners. Let's start with what seems to be a really foundational concept in Winter's thinking: charge collapse.
Right. So Winter proposes that gravity, and maybe even all fundamental forces, arise from this process he calls implosive conjugate compression of charge. Now that's a bit of a mouthful,
Yeah,
definitely.
just a bit.
But think of it like this. Instead of energy just spreading out and like dissipating, it can also fold in on itself. It becomes more concentrated, more organized.
Okay, so it's not just about things getting smaller, but that inward movement actually leads to some kind of intensification or organization.
Precisely. He suggests this implosion isn't random at all. It follows specific patterns, and a key aspect of this is fractality perfected by golden ratio.
Try
Okay,
setting a loop
fractality,
on in your
like
heart.
snowflakes.
Exactly. Imagine a snowflake. It has that repeating pattern at different scales.
Yeah.
That's fractality. And the golden ratio, well, that's this particular mathematical proportion that shows up again and again in nature, right? Often linked with balance and efficiency. Winter believes that when this self-similar pattern of implosion is governed by the golden ratio, it becomes incredibly efficient. It creates these powerful organizing effects.
So, this golden ratio driven implosion of charge, that's the fundamental mechanism. What does it actually do, in his view?
Well, according to Winter, this process is the source of what he terms negentropic copal self-organizing forces. Negentropy is essentially the opposite of chaos. It's the tendency towards order, towards complexity. So he sees this specific type of charge collapse as the fundamental engine driving not just gravity pulling things together, but also the emergence of consciousness and what some might call the life force itself, the thing that
Ugh.
animates living beings.
Wow,
But that's how-
that's a pretty encompassing idea. It's like this inward spiraling of energy is the fundamental creative force in the whole universe.
that's pretty much the essence of his argument.
Yeah.
He envisions a universe constantly shaping itself through this implosive dynamic, which then naturally leads to his perspective on the holographic nature of the universe and this concept of sacred space.
The holographic universe, the idea that the whole might be contained within every part. How does Winter's charge collapse idea fit into that?
He suggests that every point, every node in the universe, think of something as small as an atom, maybe contains a kind of holographic representation of the entire cosmos. But the clarity and the functionality of this holographic projection, well, that depends on how well that node is embedded within what he calls a longitudinal array.
A longitudinal array. Okay, what's the best way to picture that? It sounds a bit abstract.
Yeah, it is. Imagine the universe not just as like a collection of separate objects floating in empty space, but as being permeated by this underlying field of energy that connects absolutely everything. This longitudinal array is Winter's term for describing this interconnected web. Think of it maybe like the invisible network that allows radio waves to travel, connecting different devices.
Okay, like an invisible grid.
Sort of. He believes gravity and this deeper interconnectedness are mediated by these longitudinal waves, which are different from the transverse electromagnetic waves we usually think about, like light waves. Embedding within this array is apparently crucial for a node to effectively interact with and be part of this cosmic hologram.
And this embedding quality, that's where sacred space comes in. How do ancient sites fit into this idea of a longitudinal array?
Winter contrasts places like stone circles, ancient temples, what he calls sacred space, with modern environments, cities filled with steel and concrete buildings saturated with electromagnetism. He argues that these sacred spaces, often designed with specific geometric principles and may be located at energetically significant points on Earth, actually facilitate a stronger, more coherent embedding within this longitudinal array.
So a stone circle acts like a more finely tuned antenna for this underlying cosmic network compared to, say, a modern office building.
That's a really useful analogy, actually, yeah. He suggests the very structure and materials of these ancient sites might be designed to resonate with and focus these longitudinal waves. This could lead to enhanced energetic properties and potentially facilitate a clearer connection within that holographic universe. Conversely, he posits that the electromagnetic noise of modern environments can disrupt this embedding, potentially hindering communication and even having negative effects on living systems, like trying to get a clearer phone signal in an area with loads of interference.
Right, right. Okay, so some locations are better receivers and maybe transmitters within this cosmic network than others, based on how they interact with this longitudinal array. All right, let's move on to another really fascinating concept Winter introduces, the Anu, and its connection to platonic solids.
The Anu. Winter describes this as a fundamental geometric structure, characterized by 7 spins moving outward and 5 spins moving inward. Intriguingly, he suggests this specific spin ratio and geometry appear at various scales throughout the universe, from the structure of the sun's core, apparently, to the way the human heart muscle is organized, and even within atoms.
7 outward, 5 inward. That's a very specific and, yeah, kind of unusual ratio. Where does that particular configuration come from in his model?
According to Winter, this 7.5 spin ratio is directly related to the nesting of platonic solids during that charge collapse process. The platonic solids, the tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron, they're fundamental geometric shapes known for their perfect symmetry. He proposes that as charge implodes and organizes itself, it does so through a sequence of these nested platonic forms, and the Anu represents a specific, crucial stage within that geometric organization.
And he connects the 7 layers of the human heart muscle to this Anu structure.
Yes, he points to the 7 distinct layers of heart muscle as a physical manifestation of this 7-spin outward configuration of the Anu. He suggests the very design of the heart isn't arbitrary, but is actually optimized for efficient charge implosion and the generation of those life-sustaining organizing forces we talked about earlier. Think of it like those Russian nesting dolls, where each doll fits perfectly inside the next. But in this case, it's energy and spin patterns organizing matter according to these fundamental geometric blueprints.
Wow. This is painting a picture of a universe just deeply interconnected through these patterns of energy and fundamental geometry. Okay, so how does Winter view life itself within this framework of charge compression and embedding?
Winter sees life as fundamentally linked to what he calls the skill to enter charge compression. He even connects this ability to successful dreaming, and, perhaps surprisingly, to navigating the process of death. He explores this on his website, physicsofsoul.com.
So being alive and thriving is essentially about being adept at this energetic inward focusing.
In a sense, yeah. He suggests that the more efficiently an organism can manage, focus, and compress charge, the more vibrant its life force, and the greater its capacity for consciousness and awareness. He links this capacity for awareness to the distribution of charge, which he sometimes refers to as a state of heaven, like a more diffuse and widely shared energetic state.
And how does something like lucid dreaming fit into this model of charge compression and consciousness?
Well, he views lucid dreaming, that state of being aware that you're dreaming, as an example of consciously engaging with and embedding within this process of charge compression. It's like consciously entering a specific energetic state, which gives you a degree of awareness and maybe even control within that realm. You might see it as a sort of practice ground for navigating different energetic states beyond our ordinary waking consciousness.
Okay, life as mastering charge compression and lucid dreaming as conscious exploration within that state. Got it. Now, this next topic. This sounds like it comes straight out of a science fiction thriller. Project Looking Glass and phase conjugate mirrors.
Yeah, Project Looking Glass was allegedly this highly classified project that used some kind of plasma-based technology to observe potential future and past events. Winter connects this to the principle of recursively implosive neotropic plasma, basically. A highly organized and inwardly focused plasma being able to deeply embed within that longitudinal array we mentioned.
So this plasma sphere was essentially a window into different timelines. Is that the idea?
That's the implication, based on Winter's interpretation of the alleged technology anyway. By creating this highly coherent and implosive plasma, the device could supposedly interact with the longitudinal array in a way that allowed for perception of different points in spacetime. He draws a parallel here to phase conjugate mirrors, like mirrors made of obsidian, which he suggests were used in the past for a form of communication he playfully calls ancestor phone calls.
Ancestor phone calls. That's a vivid image. How would these mirrors supposedly work?
Well, the principle behind phase conjugation involves reflecting a wave back on itself, but with its phase reversed. Winter suggests that materials like obsidian, with their unique reflective properties, could facilitate a specific type of embedding in the longitudinal array. This embedding might then allow for a subtle form of connection or information exchange, perhaps with consciousnesses that are no longer physically embodied. Think of it maybe like a highly specialized antenna that can send and receive very specific types of signals across what we perceive as time, though probably not quite like in the movies.
Okay, so both Project Looking Glass and these obsidian mirrors are presented as examples of technologies, one advanced and one ancient, that leverage this ability to interact with the longitudinal array. One for temporal viewing, the other for potential communication across time or with other states of consciousness.
Right.
Now, let's shift to something that seems a bit more tangible. Pyramid power and global wireless energy.
Okay, so Winter proposes that the energy effects often attributed to pyramids aren't due to some mystical force, but rather their geometric tuning to the Schumann harmonic cascade. The Schumann resonances are these very low-frequency electromagnetic waves that naturally exist within the Earth's atmosphere. He describes this cascade as a phase conjugate pump wave, like a background energetic rhythm that could potentially be tapped into.
So, pyramids act like giant resonators tuned to the Earth's natural electromagnetic hum.
More than just passive resonators, actually. He suggests they can function as wireless power distributors. However, and this is key, he emphasizes that this energy is only readily accessible at specific nodes of the crosspoint within this planetary energy grid. He contrasts this with Nikola Tesla's famous attempts at wireless power transmission.
Ah, Teslas, right.
Winter suggests that Tesla's eventual challenges might have stemmed from not fully understanding these longitudinal nodes and also from using frequencies, like 60 Hz AC, which Winter believes are not biologically harmonious.
So he's suggesting Tesla was on the right path with wireless energy, but maybe missed a crucial understanding of these longitudinal energy points and the importance of using phase conjugate frequencies.
Exactly. Winter argues that Tesla's focus on 60 Hz, a frequency he considers disruptive to biological systems, and his apparent lack of awareness regarding the specific locations of these longitudinal nodes prevented his vision of widespread wireless power from being fully realized. He believes the geometric design of pyramids, tuned as they supposedly are to the Schumann resonances, allows them to naturally interact with his phase conjugate pump waves and distribute energy more effectively, but only at those key intersection points.
That's a really significant reinterpretation of both ancient pyramid tech and Tesla's pioneering work. Wow. Okay, now let's explore the potential connection between brainwaves, teleportation, and even the idea of stargates. This sounds wild.
Yeah, it does. Winter discusses reported brainwave measurements of individuals who have allegedly demonstrated teleportation abilities, citing someone named John Charles, for instance. These measurements supposedly showed this powerful cascade of brainwave frequencies following the golden ratio, moving from slower alpha waves up to much faster gamma waves, apparently right before and during the claimed teleportation events.
A golden ratio cascade in brainwaves. What might that signify in Winter's framework?
Well, in his view, the golden ratio is always an indicator of highly efficient charge compression and coherence. So this rapid progression through brainwave frequencies, governed by the golden ratio, suggests an incredibly focused and organized state of consciousness. He believes this highly coherent state is key to interacting with that underlying longitudinal ray in such a profound way as to potentially shift location, what we call teleportation. And he connects this directly to his understanding of the physics that might underlie how stargates and portals could theoretically function.
So, the ability to instantaneously move from one point to another, or to open gateways to other places, it isn't just science fiction in his view.
He suggests that at a fundamental level, these phenomena might involve achieving a specific state of highly coherent charge compression within consciousness itself. This state could potentially allow for a manipulation of space-time or a connection at other points within this interconnected longitudinal array. He even speculates that the pineal gland in the brain, often associated with mystical experiences in altered states, might act as a kind of natural node within this array, a potential interface between our individual consciousness and these broader cosmic possibilities.
That's truly expanding the realm of possibility. The idea that our own brain states, when highly focused and harmonized with the golden ratio, could interact with reality in such dramatic ways. Now let's shift focus slightly to the work of Phil Callahan and his intriguing connection between charge distribution in the soil and societal peace.
Right. Professor Phil Callahan, who Dan Winter actually collaborated with, Callahan did extensive research on the subtle electrical and magnetic properties of soil, particularly in relation to insect communication. But interestingly, his work also suggested a correlation between the paramagnetic conductivity of the soil, its ability to be weakly attracted to a magnetic field, and the prevalence of peace or conflict within human communities living on that land.
Wait, soil conductivity predicting societal harmony. That sounds quite unexpected. How did he make that connection?
Callahan observed that when the soil's paramagnetic conductivity was high, indicating a more efficient and balanced distribution of subtle magnetic energies across the landscape, the communities living there tended to experience greater social cohesion and peace. Conversely, when this conductivity was low or disrupted, suggesting an imbalance in the energetic flow within the soil, instances of conflict and social unrest seemed more likely to occur. Winter interprets this through his lens of charge distribution and flow, connecting it back to that idea of heaven as a state of optimal energetic balance and interconnectedness.
So, healthy, energetically balanced soil might actually contribute to more harmonious human interactions. Is that the idea?
That's the implication of Callahan's findings and Winter's interpretation, yeah. They suggest that the efficient flow of these subtle energies across the land might create a more grounding and harmonizing influence on the communities connected to it. Restoring the natural magnetic vitality and conductivity of the soil, in this view, becomes a very literal form of fostering peace at a foundational level.
Fascinating. It's like the health of the environment is intimately intertwined with the well-being of the society it sustains. Now let's tackle one of the really big questions in physics. Gravity. Winter offers a rather alternative perspective on its nature, doesn't he?
Yes, he definitely does. He proposes that gravity isn't the result of space-time being curved by mass. It's like in Einstein's general relativity. Instead, he argues it's the consequence of the acceleration of charge caused by that fractal implosion process we discussed earlier.
Okay, so instead of massive objects warping the fabric of space and time, it's the inward spiraling of energy, that charge collapse, that creates the force we experience as gravity.
Precisely. And he emphasizes the crucial role of the golden ratio in this implosive process. He suggests that the recursive adding and multiplying of phase velocities within a vortex of charge, when governed by this golden ratio, is what generates the inward acceleration that we perceive as the force of gravity.
And he points to the controversial EM drive as a potential example of this principle in action.
Yes, the EM drive, that electromagnetic propulsion system that's shown anomalous thrust without expelling propellant seemingly defying conventional physics. Winter suggests that the drive's functionality, and especially its reported efficiency, could be significantly boosted by carefully tuning the microwave frequencies inside its resonant cavity to align with his principles of golden ratio and phase conjugation. He believes this precise tuning would optimize the implosive mixing of these frequencies, leading to a more efficient projection of the longitudinal force we identify as gravity.
So if we truly understood and applied Winter's principles, the EM drive might actually become a viable and efficient form of propulsion. That's huge.
That's his contention, yes. By understanding gravity not as space-time curvature, but as an acceleration of charge driven by fractal implosion, we might be able to engineer devices that interact with and manipulate this fundamental phenomenon in new ways. It's kind of like how understanding aerodynamics allowed us to build airplanes.
This certainly offers a very different way of thinking about a core concept in modern physics. Okay, now let's move from the macroscopic realm of gravity to the microscopic world of consciousness. How does Winter propose consciousness arises within his framework?
He posits that consciousness emerges from a highly organized, liquid crystal vortex that forms and implodes according to the golden ratio within the synaptic network of the brain. Think of the vast network of neurons and their connections as a kind of field. And within this field, a highly coherent, spiraling vortex of energy arises, structured by these golden ratio principles.
And this model offers an explanation for where our consciousness might go during experiences like dreaming or even death.
Yes. He suggests that during dreaming, and the transition we call death, this stable, golden ratio-formed plasma vortex of consciousness becomes less anchored to the physical body and more deeply embedded within that larger longitudinal array of the universe. This offers a potential framework for understanding things like out-of-body experiences and the idea of consciousness persisting beyond physical life.
So, consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain's physical activity, but potentially a distinct energetic structure that could exist independently.
That's the implication of his model. The inherent stability and coherence of this plasma vortex, which it achieves through its golden ratio fractal structure, would determine its ability to maintain its integrity and potentially navigate different energetic states or dimensions of reality.
This seems to tie into the phenomenon of action at a distance, often called quantum entanglement, doesn't it? How does Winter explain that seemingly instantaneous connection between particles?
Right. He reframes entanglement as coherent longitudinal interferometry and phase conjugate embedding. So instead of two particles being mysteriously linked across vast distances through some unknown mechanism, he suggests they are both fundamentally connected through this underlying longitudinal array via phase conjugate waves.
So it's not that spooky action at a distance that Einstein famously disliked, but rather a direct connection through this energetic fabric of the universe.
Exactly. He explains that the exchange of energy between longitudinal and transverse waves only happens efficiently at specific points within this array, those nodes we mentioned earlier. When particles become entangled, they're essentially linked through shared nodes within this longitudinal field, allowing for what appears to be instantaneous correlations in their properties.
This paints a picture of a far more interconnected and dynamically linked universe than traditional physics often portrays. Hmm. Now let's explore a concept that might seem even more abstract. Love. How does Winter connect this profound human experience to the fundamental forces of the cosmos?
Well, he defines love energetically as a low-frequency, long-wave energy characterized by its embedding pattern following the golden ratio, often represented by phi. He posits that this specific energetic signature of love is actually the fundamental force that bends light through that process of implosive conjugate compression of charge. The same fundamental mechanism, he proposes, underlies gravity and all of creation. Love as a force that can bend light. That's a beautifully poetic idea, but what's the underlying principle for this connection in his work? He points to the fact that the feeling of love, that sense of deep resonance and connection we experience, apparently corresponds to the mathematical condition where maximum pressure occurs at the golden ratio point within interacting waveforms. This highly efficient golden ratio-based compression of charge is what he believes underpins both the attractive force of gravity, drawing matter together, and the emotional force of love, drawing beings into connection. It's the fundamental inward-moving, organizing tendency of the universe manifesting in different ways.
So, love isn't just a complex emotion, but a fundamental organizing principle of the cosmos, operating through the same golden ratio-driven charge compression that shapes galaxies and binds atoms. Wow. Okay, let's revisit the work of Nikola Tesla with this perspective in mind.
Right. Winter reiterates his belief that Tesla's potential limitations in fully understanding and applying the principles of phase conjugate compression and the unique properties of longitudinal waves ultimately hindered the full realization of his most ambitious projects. Things like his dream of wireless power transmission and his conceptual death ray technology.
So he suggests Tesla was incredibly close to a breakthrough, but maybe missed a crucial piece of the theoretical puzzle.
Precisely. By not completely grasping how to generate and manipulate coherent longitudinal waves through phase conjugation, creating waves that precisely fold back on themselves, Tesla couldn't efficiently tap into the underlying energetic structure of the universe in the way he envisioned. And his reliance on frequencies like 60 Hz AC, which Winter considers biologically disruptive, further compounded these technical challenges in Winter's view.
It's like Tesla had this amazing intuitive grasp of the possibilities, but lacked the complete theoretical framework, particularly around phase conjugation and longitudinal waves, to fully bring his visions to fruition. Okay, now let's explore the realm of healing and the potential of specific resonant frequencies.
Winter often mentions the work of Antoine Prioret, who claimed to have developed electromagnetic devices emitting specific frequencies that could heal cancer. He draws parallels to the frequencies used in his own technological developments, like those associated with Therap.net and F.com. He emphasizes this recurring theme of a fundamental harmonic series that appears across various natural biological rhythms: our breath, brain waves, heart rate variability, even the Earth's Schumann resonances, all acting in his view as a kind of phase conjugate pump wave that can support life and healing.
So there's a fundamental resonant harmony that underpins both our individual health and the electromagnetic environment of our planet.
That's the suggestion, yes. These phase conjugate frequencies, because of their self-reinforcing and inward-focusing nature, facilitate greater coherence and more efficient energy transfer within biological systems. This increased coherence, Winter believes, can promote healing and overall well-being. And the fact that the same harmonic patterns appear at so many different scales suggests a deep, underlying principle at play.
This idea of resonant frequencies having profound healing potential is certainly gaining more attention in various fields, both scientific and alternative health. Now, let's delve into the intriguing and perhaps less understood concept of longitudinal waves and their specific connection to life force.
Right. Winter often refers to experiments by Tom Bearden, who reportedly demonstrated that plants could continue to grow in complete darkness when exposed only to longitudinal component of sunlight. This suggests that it's this compressional, longitudinal aspect of electromagnetic energy, rather than just the transverse light waves we see, that provides a crucial centripetal or organizing force necessary for biological growth, even for seed germination.
So, the visible light we perceive might not be the only or even the primary component of sunlight that's essential for sustaining life.
According to these findings, that seems to be the case. Bearden's experiments, as interpreted by Winter, indicate that the longitudinal component of sunlight carries a specific type of organizing energy that's fundamental for biological processes. Transverse waves, with their side-to-side oscillation, just don't provide the same inward-focusing, life-generating force that these longitudinal waves seem to possess.
This really challenges our standard understanding of how light interacts with and sustains life on Earth. Now let's briefly touch upon the insights of Johannes Kepler regarding planetary orbits.
Winter often confirms and builds upon Kepler's early intuition that the orbits of the planets in our solar system exhibit a pattern of Platonic solid nesting. He argues that the underlying mechanism responsible for this stable and harmonious arrangement is, once again, charge collapse, which manifests as gravity, holding the planets in their predictable pathways.
So, the elegant geometric arrangement of our solar system isn't just a random occurrence of gravitational forces, then?
Not according to this perspective, no. The underlying geometry of Platonic solids, reflected in the orbital relationships, suggests a deeper organizing principle at play, the same fundamental way that energy structures itself through charge collapse. Gravity, in this view, is the outward manifestation of this inward organizing force, ensuring the stability and predictable dance of the planets.
It's as if the same principles of geometry and energy flow that govern the smallest particles also orchestrate the grand movements of celestial bodies. Okay, now let's explore some seemingly more esoteric concepts like bliss and kundalini from this physics-based perspective.
Winter describes the experience of bliss as a fundamental two-stage energetic process. First, there's a powerful centripetal compression of energy, followed by a radiant outward expansion or unpacking. He considers this cycle to be essential not only for maintaining robust immune health, but also potentially for the development or acquisition of what some might refer to as a soul, a coherent and stable energetic structure.
Bliss as a tangible physical process of energy flow. That's a novel way to think about it. How does the concept of kundalini fit into this energetic framework?
He describes Kundalini as a specific type of energetic wave, a phonon cascade. That's a wave of vibrational energy moving through the lattice structure of the body's tissues and fluids, particularly within the cerebrospinal fluid of the spine. This energetic wave, he suggests, enables the inhabiting of a lightning bolt, a powerful focused surge of energy within this spinal fluid, ultimately culminating in an implosive focusing of energy at the pineal gland in the brain.
So these deeply spiritual experiences aren't just subjective feelings, but have a tangible basis in terms of specific patterns of energy flow and compression within the physical body.
That's the framework that Winder proposes, yes.
Yeah.
Bliss is the fundamental cycle of energetic contraction and expansion, while Kundalini is a specific energetic pathway and process that facilitates profound experiences of heightened awareness and potential spiritual transformation through focused energy movement and implosion.
This is really starting to bridge the perceived gap between the realms of physical experience and spiritual understanding. Now, let's delve into this somewhat mysterious topic of Ormus and its historical connections to alchemy.
Ormus, often described as orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, are discussed by Winter as potential waveguides for conjugate implosion. Essentially, materials that can facilitate a more coherent and efficient inward flow of energy. He connects these substances to historical references like white powder gold and the ancient practices of alchemy. He interprets alchemy not as literally turning base metals into gold, but as a process of non-destructive implosive isotope transitions changes at the atomic level facilitated by focused energy.
So these monoatomic elements possess unique energetic properties that could potentially enhance various processes.
Yes. He suggests they can act as conduits for a more coherent and focused flow of energy, potentially amplifying biological processes and even playing a role in subtle energetic transformations at the atomic level, perhaps as the alchemist understood them. However, he often cautions against synthetically produced ormus, suggesting that naturally occurring forms might possess a more harmonious and biocompatible energetic structure.
Hmm. Sounds like there's a subtle and maybe not fully understood science to working with these unique elements. Now, let's briefly touch upon another area where these fundamental principles might be at play. Low energy nuclear reactions, or LENR.
Right. Winter briefly mentions that low-energy nuclear reactions, the phenomenon where nuclear transmutations seem to occur at much lower energy levels than conventional physics, would predict likely also operate based on these underlying principles. Things like phonon geometry, the way vibrations organize at the atomic level, and capacitive implosion, the focusing of electromagnetic energy to facilitate isotope transitions.
So even at the level of the atomic nucleus, these same core ideas of energy compression and geometric organization might be at work in these unconventional nuclear reactions.
That's the implication. Rather than being a violation of known physics, LNAR might actually be an application of these fundamental principles in a way that our current understanding of nuclear processes hasn't fully accounted for.
This perspective really does offer a unifying lens through which to view a remarkably wide range of seemingly disparate phenomena. Finally, let's consider the seemingly simple beauty of rainbows in this context.
Winter explains the formation of rainbows not just as a result of sunlight refracting through water droplets, but also as involving an element of added centripetal force or phase conjugation occurring within the atmosphere under specific conditions. He even connects this to the elusive green flash, sometimes observed at sunset, and the more esoteric concept of spiritual light.
Rainbows as something more than just an optical illusion caused by light and water.
Yes. He suggests that under certain atmospheric conditions, a form of energetic coherence or phase conjugation can occur, enhancing and focusing the light in a way that creates the vibrant spectrum we see. The green flash, that brief flash of green light, seen just as the sun dips below the horizon, is seen as an even more pronounced, perhaps purer example of this phase conjugate effect happening in the atmosphere.
It's like the atmosphere itself can act as a kind of energetic lens, focusing and enhancing light in these beautiful and sometimes fleeting ways.
Wow. Well, this has been a truly expansive and definitely thought-provoking journey through the ideas of Dan Winter. Let's try to synthesize some of the key takeaways for our listeners. Okay. At its core, Winter's work presents this vision of a universe fundamentally driven by charge collapse, that inward spiraling and organizing of energy. It's most efficient and powerful when it follows the fractal patterns governed by the golden ratio. This fundamental principle, he argues, underlies pretty much everything. The force of gravity holding galaxies together, the emergence of consciousness in our brains, the vitality of life itself, and the potential of advanced technologies. And a key aspect of this understanding is the importance of longitudinal waves and the phenomenon of phase conjugation as mechanisms for energy transfer and organization throughout the cosmos.
It's a perspective that undeniably offers a more interconnected, more holistic view of reality. It suggests that the same fundamental principles are at play across all scales of existence. So for you, the listener, why might these somewhat unconventional ideas be relevant?
While understanding this perspective has the potential to open up entirely new ways of thinking about fundamental questions. In science, in technology, in our own understanding of ourselves, it offers alternative avenues for exploring energy generation that might be more in harmony with nature, for developing healing modalities that work with the body's own energetic coherence, for understanding the nature of consciousness and our place in the universe, and maybe for potentially unlocking technologies we haven't even conceived of within our current scientific paradigms.
For those of you who are intrigued and want to delve deeper into the vast and fascinating world of Dan Winter's work, where can they find more information?
He has a wealth of resources available on his websites. There's f.com, that's fractalu.com, plafire.com, and goldenmean.info. You'll find articles, discussions, and links to his extensive video library where he really elaborates on these concepts in much greater detail.
All right. And for our final thought to leave you with today, considering this intricate and interconnected view of the universe as a fundamentally self-organizing system, driven by this inward flow of energy and the ubiquitous golden ratio. It prompts some pretty profound questions, doesn't it? Could a deeper understanding of the universe as inherently tending towards order and coherence fundamentally shift our approach to the global challenges we face?
Hmm.
And if our own consciousness is indeed so intimately linked to these principles of charge compression and the underlying longitudinal network, what are the truly transformative implications for our understanding of life, death, and our place within the grand cosmic tapestry? It's certainly a lot to contemplate.
It really is.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We definitely encourage you to share any aha moments or follow-up questions that these ideas might have sparked for you.